Hi viewers, this is Salahuddin with lecture number 27. In the previous lecture we talked about the old colonial system. We talked about the important features of that old colonial system. Now we are coming to the main topic, the American War of Independence. In the previous lecture, we talked about the relations between the 13 colonies of America and in the United Kingdom or England. So they had a relation with those colonies, which was based on certain principles, which the England was following since they had established colonies there in North America. So how the war, American War of Independence was fought, and why it become a necessity or inevitable for the 13 colonies of America to seek independence or to seek independence from the subjugation of England. In that context, we will talk about the American War of Independence. Let me give you a brief overview of the following important points, then we will come to it point by point. So the American War of Independence, England had incurred heavy expenditure of 7 years war, which was fought between 1756 to 63, and we had a detailed discussion in the previous lecture about the causes of the 7 years war, the consequences of the 7 years war, and then how it was culminated into a treaty. And we also talked about the provisions or clauses of that treaty. So to bridge the financial gap, England attempted heavy taxes on colonies, which they resented and joined together against the British rule. This is known as War of American Independence. This is just the introduction of American War of Independence, how it became a necessity, why the American War of Independence was fought, and now we will come to the causes of the American War of Independence. The first cause was the defective system of administration. Secondly, economic exploitation under the old colonial system. Thirdly, religious differences. Religious differences means the Americans, they were different from the English. Self-sufficiency of the colonists, removal of the French danger of the 7 years war, hope of assistance from France, temperamental differences between the colonists and the English, Stamp Act of 1765, Townshend's Dirty, Lord North's Tea Act and Boston Tea Party, Congress of Philadelphia 1774, and then the events of American War of Independence. So coming to the point, War of Independence, yes, England had incurred heavy expenditure of 7 years war to break the financial debt. So the American War of Independence, it was not fought all of a sudden. It was a slowly and gradual process where the colonists or those 13 colonies, they had certain reservations about the English. Those reservations at one point went up into the climax, which resulted in a war kind of situation, a chaos and anarchy in those 13 colonies. Why it burst at this certain juncture of time? If we see, England and France, they were very strong rivals. they were at dagger drawn with each other, and they were trying uh, to utmost extent to subjugate one another. They had a commercial rivalry in those colonies in different parts of the world, like Africa, subcontinent, and then even in North America, where Canada, England, and some other small countries do exist. So these commercial rivalries between the two great powers, France and England, resulted in a warlike situation. And that war was fought in 1756 to 1763 in order to dominate each other, which is known, and the war is known as 7 Years' War. And that 7 Years' War was at last mm, uh, ended as a result of a treaty which is known as Treaty of Versailles. We will also talk about this Treaty of Versailles in the next coming lecture, and the clauses and provision of that treaty. But simply to tell you about the 7 Years' War, that it was fought between the European nations, like between England on one side, Prussia, France on the other hand, or Poland on the other hand. So it was a 7 Years' War, and it was fought between this span of time. So when English fought this war, it resulted in a huge loss in both collateral as well as in lives. So as a result of this damage or this loss, they have to compensate it as a result of levying taxes on the 13 colonies of America. So when they levied taxes on those 13 colonies of America, those people resented those taxes, and resulted in a kind of a revolt against the English goods or the English people, and they boycotted even the English goods everywhere. So thus the levying of taxes on those 13 colonies of America greatly resented the American people, and culminated into a warlike situation which is known as American War of Independence. So now come to the causes of the American War of Independence. The first cause was defective system of administration. High posts, governor, colonel, captain filled by British colony had to pay taxes. So how the system was defective? The system was defective in this way, that all those high posts, which was the right of the native people, means the American, those were filled by the English people. And to those English people who occupied the high post, those American had to pay taxes to them, and the taxes were very high. So thus this defective system, where the representation of the American was minimum or not at large, they resulted in a defective system of administration, because they could not understand the customs of the English, the Americans. They could not understand the political system of the Americans. They could not understand the day-to-day affairs, how to run the government. So the system was very much defective and full of flaws. Second important, which become a potential reason for the American War of Independence. Second important cause was the economic exploitation under the old colonial system. English view that colonies exist for mother country, and there were certain limitations imposed on them. We talked about the old colonial system in detail in the previous video. We are not going in that detail now. So how they were exploited. The English completely exploited the Americans, and they view that the Americans are there for the enriching the mother country, means the England. So in this exploitation of the American people become a reason for revolting against the English people. And with this exploitation, there were certain limitations imposed on those Americans, like the Navigation Act, where they could not export or import raw materials, they could not establish or forge any kind of relation with another colony of their own, and they could not export or import materials through any other ship except the English ships. So those limitations and the exploitation of the Americans resulted in American War of Independence. Thirdly, religious differences. People living in these colonies were Puritans. Catholics also got fed up from the Test Act and the Corporation Act. So the people living in the American colonies, they were different from the people living in the in England. They were different in religious aspects. The Americans, they were largely Puritan. Puritan is a set of religious sect in Catholicism. There is Catholicism, Puritanism, and then there is Puritans, and then there is the Protestants. These three important main sects are there in Catholics. So they had religious differences. The American, they were Puritans. The English, they were mostly Protestants and Catholics. Catholics, on the other hand, also got fed up while the Catholics were very badly treated after the Glorious Revolutions in 1688, because the James and his ascendants, they were Catholics by faith. And when William came on the throne as a result of the Glorious Revolution, who was Protestant by faith, so certain restrictions were imposed on Catholics, and it was imposed prior to the Glorious Revolution, but those limitations or restrictions were severely imposed after Glorious Revolution in the form of Test Acts and Corporation Act. So the Catholics, they also got fed up from the English, because the two acts, those were severely imposed on the Americans, like the Test Act and the Corporation Act. We will talk about these two acts in detail, but simply to tell you, these were acts where the Catholics were completely banned to join any high post, and they were also prohibited from even posting in a university. They were also prohibited from joining any other elite or high posts. And certain other restrictions as a result of these two acts were imposed, like they had to pay tax and they had to pay taxes as a result of following his own faith of religion. The religious differences also become a potential cause for the War of American Independence. Self-sufficiency of the colonists. People were hardworking, liberal in thoughts, cultivating land. English become a hindrance. So the people living in America, they were agriculturists, they were toiling lands, they would work in fields, they were liberal in thoughts. There was a democracy, not today's form of democracy, but a democracy which was far ahead than the English people, because they had the political right at that time. They would elect their leader, And when the American came to know about this fact, the English are becoming a hindrance in their agricultural work or toiling fields, thus they revolted against the English people. Removal of the French danger after 7 years war. Colonial people afraid of French forces in Canada. When they left Canada after the end of 7 years war, the people shed their fear of being invaded by Canada, and they found their hope with France. So when the 7 years war was fought between England and France, France was defeated and England was also humiliated in many aspects. When the France was defeated and she has to withdraw all her assistance and forces from North America, including Canada and United States of America at this time, up to today's time. When the Canada was removed from the North America, the people of America thought that they could not be invaded by the French people, because they had this thing in mind that if we are struggling for the independence, definitely we could be either dominated by the English or the French. So when the French was removed from the Canada, they had shed their fear that they could not be anymore invaded by Canada or any other colonizers like the English. So they also motivated the American people, and thus they had to fight against the English people. So shedding fears of Canada to be invaded by them resulted in a great encouragement of the American people. Hope of assistance from France. After the 7 years war, French forces had to leave Canada as a result of Treaty of Paris. Sorry to tell you, the 7 years war was winded up as a result of a treaty which is known as the Treaty of Paris, but I forgot and I told you another name of that treaty. But it was the Treaty of Paris, which took place in 1763, where the 7 years war was ended. So the hope of assistance from France. When the 7 years war fought, the French forces withdrew from the Canada, and the American people thought that they could help they could be helped by the French forces, while feigning hope to French forces also become a potential cause for the fighting war of American independence. Temperamental differences between the colonists and the English people. Colonists were freedom-loving, bans and limitation imposed on them checked. In England, people had no freedom, no right to vote, and they were ahead of England in this aspect. So there were temperamental differences between the English people and the American people. The American people, they were freedom-loving, they had right of vote, and they could elect their member or their leader, while the English had no right of vote until 1832. So this temperamental differences between the two resulted in conflicts between the colonists and the English. Along with this, certain limitations were also imposed on the Americans, which kept them checked by those limitations, and they greatly resented those limitations, and the Americans thought that they are highly restricted by those limitations or those restrictions. So it is necessary to seek independence and fight war against the English people. Stamp Act of 1765. So what was Stamp Act? I'm coming to that point as well. New taxes were imposed on colonies. This act passed by the British Parliament, and 9 out of 13 sent a representatives meeting at Virginia, where they shouted, "No taxation without representation." And stamp papers were burnt, boycott the use of English goods. The Stamp Act was actually an act which was passed in 1765, and in Stamp Act, every paper, every printed paper, the American people had to pay tax. On every print paper, the American people had to pay tax. Thus, those 13 colonies, they burned all those stamp papers, and they even boycotted the English goods to use them. And when they had a session at Virginia, 9 out of 13 colonies sent their representatives, and they shouted daringly that no taxation without representations. This act was actually passed by the British Parliament, and Townshend was the Prime Minister of that time of England. So this Stamp Act greatly added fuel to the fire or to the miseries of the American people, and become a cause of war of independence. Townshend's duties. In 1767, Townshend proposed to collect 40,000 by levying taxes on tea, glass, lead, paper, and Boston Massacre also took place. And Townshend, when he became the Prime Minister, and he also imposed certain taxes, and he proposed that 40,000 need to be collected as a result of taxes, and those taxes were imposed on certain items like glass, lead, paper. So levying taxes on these important items, which were the daily essentials, greatly resented the American people, and the American people revolted against this Townshend Duties Act, and as a result of that revolt, there was a fight that took place between those revolutionaries and the English people, which resulted in Boston Massacre. As a result of that massacre, the people greatly infuriated, and they further went ahead of their earlier stance, and thus seeking independence of the English people. Then the 10th important cause is the Lord North's Tea Act and Boston Tea Party. In 1770, Lord North, he became Prime Minister, withdrew all taxes but continued on tea. The tea in America began selling at low prices. So when he withdrew all taxes on those important items, that Townshend imposed taxes on those important items, when Lord North become the prime minister, he removed taxes on those important items, but it remained on the tea, and the tea in America began selling at low prices. If you do, you might know the United States of America is the largest producer of tea. So selling tea at low prices greatly infuriated the farmers and those agriculturists, because it was the native crop production of the American people which was selling at low prices. So thus selling at low prices become a grievance for the American people, and they to part war against the English colony and seek freedom for the English people. Then the fourth, the 11th important reason was the Congress of Philadelphia, 1774. A session called at Philadelphia, attended by all 13 colonies' representatives. They rejected all the 13 acts passed by British Parliament since 1765. The British government rejected its demand altogether. In Congress of Philadelphia, which took place in 1774 at Philadelphia, where the representative all the 13 colonies were there, and they rejected all those acts which were passed since 1765, and those acts were passed for sole one reason: to impose certain restriction and to exploit the American people. When they had a session at Philadelphia, those 13 colonies rejected all those bills and acts, which consequently also are rejected by the British Parliament altogether. When the British Parliament rejected all those demands of the American people, or those 13 colonies, they greatly resented the miseries, increased the miseries of the American people, which become later on a potential reason for the American War of Independence. So this is all about the causes of the American War of Independence, and we will not talk about the events of American War of Independence, how the events and what were the events that took place in this meantime. It was not through negotiation and dialogue that they got independence. It was through many wars that took place between the English people and the American people. So we are not going in their detail because it is of no significance, but the important aspect or the important point is American War of Independence and its causes. In the coming lecture, we will talk about the impacts of the American War of Independence and the failure of the British people. So this is all about the American War of Independence, introduction and causes of American War of Independence. If there is any question regarding this topic, you can ask in the comment section. I will try my best to answer your query. So thank you so much for watching the video.